unlucky enough to get wounded during the Vietnam War, your chances of survival were higher than in any other war before it. Not because the fighting was any less brutal, but because when the call went out, a medevac helicopter was in the air within minutes, often flying into active fire zones. Survival came down to the crews who flew into combat, landing wherever they had to get the wounded out. That process usually began on the ground, in the middle of a firefight. A soldier would go down, and within seconds the men around him were already moving, pulling him back, getting low, and trying to create just enough space for the medic to work. There was no real safety, only slightly better positions, and treatment started right there under whatever cover could be found. The medic worked quickly, focusing on what mattered most. Bleeding had to be controlled, breathing had to be maintained, and the wounded man had to be stabilized enough to survive the next step. There was no time for anything beyond that. Once it was clear he couldn't stay where he was, the call went out. That meant finding a landing zone. Sometimes it was already there. A small clearing, a stretch of road, a dry section of rice paddy. Other times it had to be made, with men moving quickly to mark out a space while the rest of the platoon stayed engaged. It didn't have to be secure. It just had to be usable. The helicopter was coming either way. From that point on, everything moved quickly. Dustoff crews were positioned to respond immediately, and when the request came in, they launched without delay. In many cases, they had only limited information, grid coordinates, number of wounded, and a general sense of the situation on the ground. That was enough. As the aircraft approached, the sound carried ahead of it. On the ground, the platoon prepared to move the wounded. The medic stayed with him, keeping pressure on wounds, adjusting bandages, doing whatever could be done while waiting for the helicopter to arrive. The approach was often the most dangerous part. Pilots brought the aircraft in low, sometimes taking fire as they came in, with little time to adjust once the landing started. The helicopter didn't circle, it came straight in. When it touched down, everything happened at once. The wounded were carried forward, sometimes by 2 men, sometimes more, depending on the terrain and the condition of the patient. Crew members moved to meet them, pulling them on board as quickly as possible. There was no delay, no extra movement, just a rapid transfer from ground to aircraft. The helicopter stayed just long enough to load, then it lifted. Once airborne, the situation changed again. Inside the aircraft, the medic took over immediately. Treatment continued without pause, now in a confined space with limited equipment and no stable environment. The helicopter moved low and fast, and every movement inside had to be controlled and deliberate. Bleeding was checked again. Airways were monitored, fluids were administered when possible. Every action was focused on one thing, keeping the patient alive long enough to reach the hospital. The flight itself was often short, but those minutes mattered. One of the key advantages of Dustoff was speed. In many cases, a wounded soldier could be transported from the battlefield to a surgical facility in less than an hour. That window made a measurable difference in survival. By the time the helicopter approached the hospital, the next stage was already in motion. Medical teams were waiting. The aircraft landed, and the wounded were moved immediately. From the helicopter to the hospital, there was no pause. Corpsmen and nurses took over, moving the patient inside and preparing for more advanced care. The transition was fast and coordinated, designed to keep everything moving forward without delay. Inside, treatment continued at a higher level. Doctors and surgical teams assessed the wounds again, making decisions quickly and moving the patient into surgery if needed. What had started on the ground under fire was now part of a structured medical process with more resources and more time, but still the same objective: keep the patient alive. Dustoff made that possible. Before Vietnam, many wounded soldiers never reached a hospital in time. Distance, terrain, and delays in evacuation made survival far less certain. During Vietnam, that changed. Helicopter evacuation reduced the time between injury and treatment dramatically. In many cases, that time was cut to under an hour, and survival rates improved as a result. Over the course of the war, Dustoff crews evacuated hundreds of thousands of wounded personnel, both military and civilian. The missions were flown day and night, in all conditions, across terrain that made landing difficult and often dangerous. The risk was constant. Helicopters took fire, some were shot down. Crew members were wounded and killed during evacuation missions, but the response never changed. If the call came in, the helicopter launched. From the moment a man was hit, the process was already moving. From the ground, where the medic worked to keep him alive, to the helicopter where treatment continued in flight, to the hospital where surgical teams took over. Each step depended on the one before it, and every one of them depended on time. Because in Vietnam, survival often came down to how quickly that helicopter arrived, and whether it could get in and out before the situation on the ground changed again.